Welcome to the Rhode Island Ceilidh Club and another lecture sponsored by the 1916 committee. It's good to see some old faces. It's good to see some new faces. And this is a monthly event that the 1916 committee puts on. After we hear the lecture tonight, I'll have a few announcements about what's upcoming both at the club and with the 1916 committee. But I know everyone's here because Scott Malloy is going to talk to us about the evil, at times, Providence Journal. Just to prepare you. But Scott, in his biography that he sent to the 1916 committee, is very proud of being a Rhode Island RIPTA Transit Authority bus driver for almost a decade, more than a decade. He was the head of the union when he was a bus driver. He worked in Washington, D.C. with Claudine Schneider. And I remember back in those days, I was a member of an organization called Irish Northern Aid, where we supported the Republican struggle in Ireland, in the north of Ireland. And Scott, I remember one time, was the guest speaker at a banquet, and he said it was the only time he was proud to say he was a Republican. Right? And then he had a career at URI as a lecturer, professor, labor relations and history. He had a PhD from Providence College. But one thing he doesn't say in his bio, and it kind of bothers me, is that I know he graduated from Rhode Island College, a working class college. Yes. He graduated in 1970, I was in 1969, and even then, Scott was up at the microphone raising hell about the war in Vietnam. So some things never change, right? Here he is, Scott Malloy.
Thank you, Jimmy. Jimmy mentioned Rhode Island College, and it's funny because I've just been named the co-chair of the 50th anniversary committee of the class of 1970. Where did it go? Oh, and was I crazy accepting that? But anyway, before I get going, there's a lot of people I could say thank you here tonight, but Jimmy mentioned I went to PC and I got the altar boy doctoral degree. I took one course a semester for 10 years. That was the longest incubation in academic history. But the two people that I learned the most about Ireland from, one of them happens to be here tonight, Dr. Paul O'Malley from PC, who at over the age of 60 is still going on like he was a young kid. And the other person was Dr. Pat Conley, and he sent along a little booklet for all of you, as I have for you later, and I'll tell you about that in a few minutes. Anyway, back in the 1940s and 1950s, believe it or not, a local Irishman named George M. Potter, P-O-T-T-E-R, was the chief editorial writer for the Providence Journal. He was a 1921 graduate of Brown University. He won the Pulitzer Prize for editorial writing in 1945. I mean, that's the creme de la creme in journalism. He was given an honorary doctoral degree from his old alma mater in 1946. He received a Guggenheim Fellowship that year, 1946, and that was also a great year for other things. I was born! Hey, an original baby boomer, 46. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. 47, 45. But the other fascinating thing is, and this is going to weave in and out of here, so I threw it in right where it should be chronologically. In 1946, as far as I could tell, a guy who was probably a leftist wrote perhaps, without a doubt, the most influential book about Irish America in Rhode Island, but also wrote one of the most important pieces of fiction about Irish America in the whole nation. And it was Edward McSorley who wrote Our Own Kind. And believe me, if you never do anything else in your life, put it in your bucket list. Read this. I didn't know who I was in terms of ethnicity or where I was going in life. I read that book. He put me on the straight and narrow path. It's a fascinating look at Rhode Island Irish society around 1900. And even though it's fiction, it's very heavily factual. You pick out people and places and things you all know about. So that came out in 1946. We're going to see a little window of opportunity here that leads to an Irish literary renaissance both here and in Ireland itself. In 1948, George Potter, who knew his history, paid tremendous homage to an earlier Providence Journal editor who, even though he wasn't Irish, took a stance on behalf of the Irish people, and that was Alfred Williams. And in 1948, Potter wrote a series of 10 articles about Alfred Williams and his life and his career at the Journal. I'm going to be passing some things around. Just keep them going, if you will, and get them back up here. Took me a long time to steal some of the stuff myself, so I don't want to lose anything. But here's a picture, not too great a picture, but of Alfred Williams, who was the, well, actually he was born in Taunton in 1840. He was a farm boy. He joined the Civil War on the side of the North, rose from private to captain when he finally got out. He also wrote articles describing camp life during the Civil War. And Horace Greeley of the New York Tribune hired him while he was in the service. And you may remember, if you don't remember Horace Greeley, you will remember what he said. Go west, young man. They always see that in all the books on American history. Go west, young man. He was presidential timber around that time, but it never quite worked out for him. But he was very pro-Irish and carried all sorts of Irish literature and news articles in the New York Tribune at that time. Anyway, when Alfred Williams gets out of the service, he's only a kid in his early 20s at best. Greeley hires him full-time, and he sends him on his first assignment to Dublin, Ireland, to cover the Fenian trials in 1865 through 66. Imagine a young kid like that going off to Ireland to cover these incredible stories. And what was amazing is that the Fenian trials at the time involved about a half a dozen major personalities. O'Donovan Rossa is on trial. James Stephens, the head of the Irish Republican Brotherhood. He escaped, though. There's always a couple of Irishmen that escape. But I'm still looking for him. I think he's in Rhode Island. In fact, Jimmy, they think he's at your house. But anyway. So he goes off to Ireland to do that. Well, the British were trying these Irish people because there was a move afoot to enlist as many volunteers who were veterans of the Civil War to return to Ireland and have an uprising, because now they had military experience. They knew how to operate all kinds of weaponry and guns and whatnot. So they were looking to do that. The British were scared to death. And that's why they rounded these 6 or 7 guys up. Anyway, poor Alfred Williams gets there, and in his baggage, you know, they're searching everything. And they find some sort of a portrait in one of his carpet bags. And they arrest him immediately because someone said, well, that's a picture of John Mitchell, the Irish revolutionary. It was Abraham Lincoln. But they locked him up, and they wouldn't let him out. He had to go and get, in fact, Horace Greeley had to go and get, really, the United States ambassador to England, who was a famous individual in his own right, Charles Francis Adams.
Sure. He
He had to spring Alfred Williams, who was there covering those trials. Well, you know, there's always in history that wonderful thing they call unintended consequences. That some things happen, like, who could have ever known, who could have ever thought that this might occur? And so you've got Alfred Williams, a Protestant Yankee who can trace his roots back to the Mayflower, suddenly is smitten with Irish culture, literature, history, the people, everything. He's just overwhelmed by it. And he embraces it for the rest of his life. And we'll see what a fortuitous thing that was for Rhode Island over time. When he comes back after a year, he actually did a little sightseeing along the way. But somebody was always on trial anyway in Ireland, so if you wanted a story to write, just wait a couple of days. But when he comes back, he brings a trunk load, I mean a boatload of books that he had collected there. And I say books, I'm talking volumes, and Donald Negrin will tell you because he's used them. Books that go back to the 17th and 18th century. These are rare. These are rare in Ireland, never mind outside of it. And he brings back dozens, hundreds of books. And he also creates a network of agents who will look around Ireland and Great Britain for two things for him. One, he's looking for more material. He becomes kind of like a pack rat. And the other thing is he wants to keep an eye on what's going on in Ireland so he can get tipped off ahead of time if anything big should come up while he's around. So he comes back to America. He ends up at the Providence Journal as a writer in 1875 for the munificent sum of $12 a week, which actually wasn't bad money in that era. Somehow or other, this guy who embraces Irish nationalism, he doesn't keep it a secret. It's in all his writings. He becomes editor of the journal from 1884 to 1891. Now, there's a whole reason for this, and believe me, it is such minutiae and so much Rhode Island politics, it would drive you crazy just to know that there was a lot of inside trading going on. But he ended up kind of as the compromise candidate, if you will. The Providence Journal, as all of you know, and I'm not going to preach very long about this one, but for about, 18 decades or so, they've had nothing better to do than attack the Irish, and especially the Irish Catholics. And, they still get a zinger in there every once in a while. And the editor who was most responsible for that stance was a no-good, low-life individual named Henry Bowen Anthony. And Anthony would later go on to become governor and then United States Senator from Rhode Island. I mean, this guy had tremendous power and influence. And he said early in his career, this is in the 1840s, he said, if Irish immigration continues as it's been going, and I quote, Rhode Island will no longer be Rhode Island. It will become a province of Ireland. St. Patrick will take the place of Roger Williams, and the Shamrock will supersede the anchor and the state's motto, hope. Wow, you think we had all that power way back then? But Williams did something else. I mean, he was a really erudite and intelligent individual. When he becomes editor of the Journal, he did something that was almost unheard of at that time. He created a Sunday edition. Prior to that, it was Monday through Saturday, and Sunday get the day off. And but he opens a Sunday edition, and it's different from the other days. This is a section that will carry short stories, literary events, poetry, all kinds of material. But the biggest thing is, he includes about 100 articles, this is just in the 1880s, from the up-and-coming avant-garde Irish writers. People that, I don't think the other people in the paper understood who he was taken from. They didn't know who those people were at that particular time. So it's really the first wave of the Gaelic literary revival. And listen who's there. You recognize a couple of the names. William Butler Yeats, that's one of the greatest poets in Western civilization. Catherine Tynan, Alfred Graves, Rose Kavanaugh, Douglas Hyde, the founder of the Gaelic League and the first Irish president to ever visit Providence. Douglas Hyde, my goodness. Quite a group. And Yeats would say, later on in his career, and I quote, the only regular and certain paycheck I received in that era was from the Providence Journal. I find that so hilarious. William Butler Yeats, can you imagine that? Dependent on the Providence Journal for his food and board. In 1881, Williams will write and publish a book of poetry about Ireland. Again, he's got people searching throughout the British Isles looking for material about the old sod. And George Potter, you're going to meet in some more detail in just a minute, writes about Alfred Williams. And he says, "We know the literature revival was an expression of the gathering of national forces that won for Ireland complete freedom." Well, he's a little off base there, obviously, but you can't question his enthusiasm and his sincerity about Ireland. So both these guys were something. In 1886, Alfred Williams takes a second trip back to Ireland, renewing friendships, creating new ones, loading the boat up with more books and everything else that he could drag along. Anyway, he retires as editor of the Journal in 1891, and he dies in 1896, 5 years later, at the rather tender age of 56 years old. That wasn't very old even then. But, and here's where we come out looking good, he donates his collection of 3,000 volumes, mostly of Irish material, to the Providence Public Library. 3,000 volumes, if you can believe it. He did something else. He left an estate to the library to take care of his books and continue to purchase new material. The estate amounted to $283,000 in 1896, which would make you an instant multi-millionaire. You could go tell Gina who you want to run that lottery. You could do anything you want. That was a lot of money. Well, I think they should first of all hire the state police forensic audit team to see where that money went, because they didn't do with it what they were supposed to. They did some of it, but nowhere near enough. The PPL, the Providence Public Library, was overwhelmed with all this material. Quite an endowment. They boxed it all up and stuck it on the 6th floor. Most of you probably say, the 6th floor? We never knew they had a 4th floor. On the 6th floor, they leave it up there. But it will be brought down during this revival that I'll tell you about in just a minute. When Williams dies, George Potter will write many, many years later, he was succeeded by new editors not interested in Irish letters, meaning literary items. And Pat Conley always has this great saying when we talk about English literature and language and stuff. He said, "The English tried to shove their language down our throat, but we were the ones who had to teach them how to use it properly." Oh, that's a great one. What a good singer that is. I'm gonna wait on a plane to Ireland to find somebody and use that with. Anyway, so in 1948, George Potter, the creme de la creme of Brown University and heavily and highly interested in Irish affairs, writes this 10-part series about Alfred Williams. And this is simply a Xerox from the journal. This would be number 6 as an installment of 10. I don't know what I did. I had number 1, but I'm not sure what I do with it. So, the series shows in 1948, and it creates this incredible, it's almost like the fuse was waiting to be lit, this upsurge in nationalist activity here in Irish America, particularly in Rhode Island. In January of 1949, because of all his writing, which, as I said, hit a raw chord, the Irish were reading. They were now a very important part of the constituency of the Providence Journal, and they sold copies. So in January of '49, they renamed the collection the Alfred Williams Memorial Center for Irish Studies. Well, what a mouthful that is, huh? They should have come up with something a little bit better. Now, who are the custodians of that tremendous collection? The Providence Journal. Well, they got part of there, so that's not too bad. The Friendly Sons of St. Patrick in Providence. The Elmwood Sons and Daughters of Erie. The Elmwood Sons. Elmwood was loaded with Irish in that particular era. Hard to believe. And then the Hibernians, as well as the Sons of Irish Kings. We're going to go hit all these people up for a lot of money to get some more books. The formal dedication to take notice of Williams being remembered and his collection being taken out of mothballs occurred on February 4th, 1949, at a public meeting at the Rhode Island School of Design Auditorium. 1,000 people showed up, and they had to turn hundreds away. Can you imagine? 1,000 people showed up and filled the place right through the rafters. The MC of the night was none other than the famous Irish poet Patrick Colum, and he said of Alfred Williams, the fosterer of Irish writers who were my elders, paying respect to him that without his assistance he might not have had any elders and there would be no literary revival. Now, of course, Williams had been involved in and interested in Irish folklore in particular, but he also was part of something called a School of Imaginative Literature, and he actually impacted, along with all the things that he did, people like William Butler Yeats, T.S. Eliot, and James Joyce. I mean, boy, what a triumphant that is to look at. They also put together a play about the life of Alfred Williams and when he was arrested in Ireland and all the things that he did. And it was then played, see if any of you know this particular radio station, WPJB-FM, the radio station for the Providence Journal. They put the play on. Of course, you couldn't see them, but you could hear them, which I guess is just as good. All kinds of congratulatory letters and gifts and books and things started to come into the PPL because of this. This, by the way, is this is my last copy of Our Own Kind by Edward McSorley about the history of the Irish in Providence around World War I. I used to have about a dozen of those, maybe $1 or $2 at a yard sale, and but I always give them away to people who I thought were interested, and now I'm down to one, so make sure I get that one back. But if you want, you just go on one of those Amazon things. It'll cost more in postage than it will to get the book. So they're out there just waiting for you to get in touch with them. Anyway, because Potter has now stirred up a hornet's nest of interest, he follows through, as does the Providence Journal, on a really unusual quest. Like his intellectual mentor, even though he never knew him, Alfred Williams, George Potter, in 1949, sets out to go to Ireland for 2 months to write a long series of pieces about the old sod. He's going to follow in the footsteps of Williams in 1949. They have a tea for him in almost every Irish group in Rhode Island for about a whole month. He must have had the runs, having that much tea. But when he went to Ireland in July 1949, he had a chauffeur that took him around the entire country for a couple of months. He wouldn't return until the end of the summer. He went to places like Dingle, the Blasket Islands. Any of you ever been to the Blasket Islands? I mean, it's not much there anymore. A few sheep and some graffiti. But when he went there in '49, he said the main import of the Blasket Islands was the typewriter because everybody in the place had written their own book. Unbelievable if you ever know about that history of that cute little place. And then he has these wonderful sayings. He writes almost poetically and insightfully. It's like you finish reading what he writes and you say, wow, that was nothing. It was so easy to do and so enjoyable. He said, the Irish and potatoes are as close as the next minute. The Irish and potatoes are as close as the next minute. I thought that's so good. And then he interviews a Catholic priest, and we won't mention any names here, but he says of the English, they're a bastardized culture without character. And if it hadn't been for Gaelic, they would really be in trouble. So I love that. He visits the home of Douglas Hyde in County Roscommon. And by the way, if you're from Roscommon, or actually anywhere in Ireland, this book is filled with genealogical nuggets. These articles that he writes, which will later become a book. And he says about Roscommon, you cannot throw a stone without hitting somebody who has either lived in Providence or has a brother or sister there. I mean, Rhode Island had to be unbelievable in that particular era. The one thing he does criticize, though, in his writings after he returns, is the role of censorship by the Catholic Church. That's the one unequivocal thing that he states. And being a reporter, you can understand that. And understanding some of the things they did, we can also agree with him on that as well. He spent time in Dublin. When he went to Grafton Street, he said it reminded him of Westminster Street. I don't know who got the loose end of that stick, but Grafton Street or Westminster. He said the second leading industry in Dublin was dissertations on James Joyce. And if you've ever seen a person who's grappling with that difficulty of trying to understand and digest the works of James Joyce, I mean, they walk around almost like in a fog like this. They look like the Walking Dead. But every other person you bump into in Dublin, he says at that time, was writing a dissertation about James Joyce. That just cracks me up. He also wrote about hurling, horses, pig markets, a commemorative service that he witnessed for Michael Collins, the Abbey Theatre, in which he said, the Irish are born actors. Where did they ever get that from? At every opportunity in his subsequent articles in the book, he attacks the partition of Ireland and promotes nationalism and independence. This is an editor for the journal. And this stuff is printed. It's absolutely unbelievable, but it must have sold some papers at the time. Anyway, he comes home at the end of the summer of 1949, and he says he can still smell the turf on his clothes. I love that. And then he says, too, I may forget what an Irishman said to me, but I'll always remember how he said it. Couldn't remember what he said, but I'll always remember how he said it. Boy, and anybody's been to Ireland, you know exactly what he's talking about. A beautiful, beautiful sentence. He went on to say, I have tasted Ireland, not studied it. In Ireland, I felt at home. Well, that's a sentiment I think an awful lot of us have felt over the years. Anyway, on November 1st, 1949, the first of 17 articles by George Potter make their appearance. And I just happen to have a Xerox of that. This was on what they call in the newspaper industry above the fold, on the front page. That means it was above when they cut the paper in half. And here it is, An Irish Pilgrimage by George M. Potter, and that's the first one that would show up in the newspaper way back when. And I also mentioned County Roscommon, because I have a great thing about that, because my grandfather was born there. And this is his birth certificate that I picked up there back in 1970. Well, talk about 50th anniversaries of when I was out of college. Just 50 anniversaries going back to Ireland. Anyway, the articles subsequently, because they they just flummoxed the Irish American community. People were so excited to read these wonderful, beautiful, poetical articles. The journal then collects them and puts them in a slim book called, hey, An Irish Pilgrimage. This is an original. This is a hardcover. There weren't a lot of them, and they're hard to find now. When I first gave this talk, which is a little different, down in Newport several years ago, I just retired from URI, and being the good radical that I am, I said, you know, how can I go out and talk about a book that nobody's going to be able to find? How are you going to get to these articles? So I went down to the URI print shop, a Union Place. I said, how the hell much would it cost me to have this little thing done over, but in paperback? It was a couple of dollars each. You know, and I'm flush with cash at that time, I'm retired. My kids have been through college. I'm cooking. So I don't know how many, I got several hundred of them. And everyone who still makes it through in another 15 minutes or so, you'll be done. You can get up and have one for free. I'll pass that around. And the reason I do that, I had such a wonderful job for 30 years working for the state at URI, and 11 years before that at RIPTA. And I wanted to say thank you to the taxpayers for putting up with me and giving me a great job. So this is a little payback. And we also figured we'd throw in Pat Conley's pamphlet, The Irish in Rhode Island. So if you read this, if you read Potter's book and Our Own Kind, you'll never have to read another thing about Ireland. So, those are all available later. This is a picture of George Potter. Actually looks kind of like a Yankee or a mean son of a bee. But here he is. Let's see. So anyway, Potter will say at the beginning of the book, it is my hope that readers of these articles will enjoy them as much as I enjoyed Ireland and the Irish people. It comes from my heart when I dedicate this book to the memory of Mr. Williams, who, though dead these many years, is as real and as near to me as though he was standing over my shoulder and nodding encouragement to my Irish pilgrimage. Beautiful writing. Because of the attendant publicity, again, this is building up year after year after year, Dr. Richard Hayes, the director of the Irish National Library, visits the Providence Public Library to examine and be amazed at the collection. Comes all the way from Ireland to look at it, and then agrees to send duplicates and other books, which he follows through on. An amazing thing. In 1951, George Potter, God bless his soul, finds a brilliant copy, a reproduction of the Book of Kells, and acquires it for the collection at the PPL. That's followed by a 2-week photographic exhibition of Potter's journey to Ireland at the Providence Journal, which is attended by 3,000 people in 2 weeks. 3,000 people turn out there. In 1952, Potter once again digging deep, not into his own pockets, but having other connections around town, purchases an original copy of the Irish Declaration of Independence. And in 2016, 100 years after the Easter Uprising, and I think our dear Donald Degnan here was responsible for this, that original poster, along with a host of other Irish memorabilia from the collection, was put out on display. There was also pictures of Don there in his youth in Ireland. I think he was actually putting some of those posters up back in the GPO, but I can't prove that. But the book served as a center for lectures, study groups, extension courses, essay contests, and in the words of Potter, all to the end of cultivating the rich Irish sources Mr. Williams himself loved and fathered. And then in a stroke of political, I don't know what to call it, the congressman from Rhode Island, the Irish American, who lived out in the boondocks there in Harmony, Rhode Island. John Fogerty wakes up one morning to find a fiery cross on his lawn, a message from the Ku Klux Klan, which is very powerful in Rhode Island in 1924 and 1925. But Fogerty pulls a coup d'etat, and you know how some of those Congress representatives can work those rules and regulations without you knowing it. He passes a piece of legislation which will prohibit any financial aid to Great Britain as long as Ireland remains partitioned. They cut off the aid, which was set up after World War II by Secretary of State George Marshall to keep the communists at bay in Europe. And now here's John Fogerty pulling out the rug from underneath John Bull. The New York Times front page headline read, "House cuts off aid until Britain ends Irish partition." It was an international cause. It got the attention of everybody in America, on the national and international scene, as well as little old Rhode Island. And thank you, John, for what you did. And this is an original button that I've got left in my collection. Labor supports Fogerty. Again, he was president of the Bricklayers Union at one time, and always did everything by union labor, usually by bricks, and was always known for wearing his Kelly green tie. This is a fascinating picture of him giving a talk at the Democratic State Committee. Here's Fogerty up in front. You can see him with his bow tie when this comes around. Sitting between him is Frank Rail, the head of the Democratic Party. Again, this was kind of the New Deal with Italians and Irish and everybody else. To his far right is John Pastore, and then up on the wall is a poster of Theodore Francis Green. Keep that airport green. Anyway, fascinating things though when you think about it that went on right here in Rhode Island. But one of the great tragedies that we suffer is that on August 10th, 1959, George Potter dies rather unexpectedly, again at the tender age of 59. This is not old, not then. 2 weeks after finishing his monumental study of Irish immigration to the United States called To the Golden Door, written in beautiful prose. In fact, I was looking on the rack earlier. I thought it might be up there, but I couldn't find my copy either. Somebody's stealing them all. I don't know who that is. But in his funeral cortege is every major Irish-American figure in New England. George Potter's reputation had gone so far. To the Golden Door is published on St. Patrick's Day, 1960, less than a year after his death, by Little Brown and Company, with that beautiful writing style. 150,000 words, 623 pages, 47 short chapters, and 6 pages. Can you believe this? 6 pages on the John Gordon murder trial of Amasa Sprague. I've never seen that in any look at Irish immigration to America. And Potter, God bless him, put that in there. And listen to what he says as to who the real culprits are. Not John Gordon. He says, rather, the village half-wit and a feather-brained prostitute. That's an Irish writer that I like. Tells it like it is. 7 weeks later, after the release of the book, the Williams Collection has its name changed to the George Potter and Alfred Williams Memorial on Irish Culture. Still way too long. Potter leaves behind another 1,000 books to add to the collection, Today there are more than 2,400 Irish volumes, 400 pamphlets, 1,000 broadsides, 100 pieces of sheet music, and folders of correspondence. It's a treasure trove.
It really is.
Of research, and how few people know a damn thing about it. What a tragedy. What a tragedy. This may be the largest collection outside of Ireland. They're still arguing among a couple of different colleges and the Providence Public Library in Ireland as to who is in the second place. With Potter's death, as we get near the end here, hey, you want a free book, you're going to have to pay. John Fogarty, a guy who's never been given his due as far as I'm concerned. One of the most famous, maybe the most famous Irishmen to ever come out of Rhode Island. And we could never do enough for all the things that he did. But he dies in 1867, again at another young age. On the eve of the Troubles is when he passes. And in 1949, John Fogarty said about the violence in Northern Ireland, 1949, the time to remedy this condition is in advance of gunplay or other strife. Imagine that, he said that 20 years before the Troubles. Stop the problem now, and you won't suffer the consequences later on, and of course, nobody listened to him. So we have this period, this era of rich Irish stew, if you will. McSorley with his Our Own Kind. It became a Book of the Month Club selection. This is like being knighted by Sir Lancelot. Our Own Kind sells 750,000 copies in Rhode Island, across America, and across the world. 750,000 books. As far as I know, it's the most best-selling book in Rhode Island history. 750,000 copies. As I said, a wonderful, wonderful thing to take a look at. Also I'm just about ready to finish up here, 1948. A lot of people don't realize this one either. Rhode Island is visited because Rhode Island is the place to go in America in that era, if you're Irish. Even Dave Valera goes to Providence City Hall and is greeted by a crowd of 5,000 people. 5,000. Later in the day, he addresses the General Assembly. This is his picture. There's a police officer here. To his left is Dev. The guy in the middle there, he looks like Adolf Hitler. I don't know how the hell he got in there. But then there's Governor Dennis Roberts. And to the far left is Rabbi Lewis from Truro Synagogue in Newport, who was billed, and it's quite true, the only Dublin-born rabbi in America. And he was there for 30 years and the subject of a lecture in Newport just last weekend. So quite a crew that turned out for all of that. Rhode Island at that time, 1950, 51, 52, right in that era. Democratic hegemony. The Democratic Party runs Rhode Island. Don't confuse that with today's Democratic Party. Jimmy was saying when I used to work with Claudine Schneider, I used to say she was a radical Republican. You know? Radical Republican. So you have the Democrats, you've got McSorley's work, which puts Rhode Island on the map everywhere. You've got the Potter-Williams phenomenon, and you've got the Fogarty resolution. And so it's after the war that the Irish begin to come of age, into the middle class, into the professions, graduating from Providence College, skilled workers. The landscape will change dramatically. Now, to really prove what happened With Williams, I can do it, but as I said, it would take a 3-hour lecture, and nobody wants that, including me. In terms of George Potter, I don't know what to say with that. You would have to have someone who could get in to examine the editorial board meetings of the Providence Journal, and rest assured, they have a poster up of me that says shoot on sight anywhere within this building. So if somebody can ever get in there, we may find out why George Potter did so well. But after 17 decades of unremitting hatred and venom aimed at Irish Americans here in Rhode Island, the Providence Journal and the Yankees lost. We won. We won that battle. We won it a long time ago. They finally shut up, and we shut them up by showing them what we could do once we had the opportunity and not to be pushed around in our own backyard. The Providence Journal finally had its own Irish genealogy, but it wasn't worth very much at that particular time. When George Potter died, I'm going to end on this. When George Potter died in 1959, John Fogarty, the congressman, read several local obituaries into the congressional record. And then he added his own remarks, his own prepared talk. And in retrospect, as you listen to this, it's really an epitaph for Alfred Williams, for George Potter, who had just died. And in a lot of ways, I think it was an epitaph for John Fogarty himself. He knew the handwriting was on the wall. He wasn't going to live forever. But he knew he was part of this wonderful tradition that had been handed down and had been built up over the decades. And this is what he says. Mr. Speaker, it is the people who sent us to the House of Representatives. Here in this House, the problems with which we deal are the problems of the people, their security, their aspirations. The more we mingle with people, the more we listen to people, the more we like people, the more, in short, we behave in the patterns of the George Potters of the world, the better I am sure that we will handle these problems. What a beautiful, beautiful thing. At the end of later in his career, John Fogarty was approached by the Providence Journal, and they offered to endorse him, which probably would have killed at least 300 Yankees the next day of heart attack. They offered to endorse him, and he says, no, thank you. That would be the kiss of death. And so I end by saying, how the tables had turned. Thank you. Jordan, the best thing is to call. The best thing to do is to call the Providence Public Library and ask for the Irish collection. His name is Jordan. What's his last name? Goffin. And he'll be glad to see people. The more we send down there, the better. It's a beautiful place. They now have a spot for a fundraising situation right there in the library, and almost directly across from where this collection is. So we could keep Jordan busy, and we could run out with the original Declaration of Independence. Anyway, I'll be glad to take any questions if anyone's got them. And when you're ready to go, after nobody's going to ask any questions now, just come up and take a book. And if for some reason there aren't enough, I'll get them full.
Yeah, in addition to our own time, oddly endorse your enthusiasm for the difference.
Wonder I get that from Paul.
But nevertheless, there was a follow-up book, Young McDermott. I really identified with that because the principal characters, his father my great grandmother Annie Solis came to Providence in 1869. The name got somewhat anglicized as Searles. The weatherman was just because, and they're very Irish. But anyway, my dad, Annie married George O'Malley, and her boast to her dying day was that all of my boys were tradesmen. Austin O'Malley worked for Gilbane, a carpenter. George O'Malley was an ironmonger. Matt O'Malley worked in the Princeton of the trade. He was a plaster. And something in my time here, it's another story.
Well, you're quite right about our own kind, because in it, the protagonist, as he grows up, and his grandfather watches over him to Americanize him, but to keep the Irish culture there.
Yeah.
But he also is fighting in the Iron Molders Union to get Italians admitted.
Yeah.
Because he said, who are we to discriminate against anyone after what we've been through?
Yeah.
So it's a tremendous book like that. It'll make you proud to be Irish. Any other, this is how I used to go around at URI, just walk up and down the car. It's a lot of fun. Yes,
Easy
Andy.
question, Scott. What you said, when was the exact year that Concord introduced the resolution?
1950, as I remember.
1950?
Yes.
And it was introduced in Congress.
In Washington.
In Washington.
Yeah, but it didn't last very long, because once the powers that be understood what had happened, they knocked that right down, but that shook the whole Western Alliance. In fact, the Providence Journal came up with an editorial that said this would basically be the end of Western civilization, and the only celebrations would be held in Moscow, not Dublin. And again, it was the Red Scare, it was the Cold War, and so you have to understand all of this was in the shadow of that. And so Fogarty had even more guts doing what he did, because, you know, they must have called him everything under the sun. But he was a great guy.
Did it pass?
Pardon?
Did it pass?
It passed,
It did.
but it only lasted a couple of days, and then they overthrew it. But the fact that he did it got the front page around the world. And, you know, the byline was Providence. we were the center of Irish nationalism at one time. So we got to do that again. We're going to get the children, the grandchildren, get them one of these little pamphlets here, easy to read, bribe them, get them an ice cream afterwards, whatever you got to do. The only way to do it. Just kind of.
Scott, the collection at the Providence Library, is it easy access to it, or?
Yeah, I mean, all you have to do is go in and take a couple of elevators. It is kind of hard to find, so you may go, but hey, get lost in a library. It's not like getting lost, you know, in Crime Town, so it's not a bad way to go. But yeah, it's there. Just ask. They may have to send a courier or a guide with you to find it. So yeah, I encourage everybody to go. Yes.
One of Fogarty's last election, the Journal endorsed naturally his Republican opponent. And the rationale in the editorial was, it would be nice to have a new voice in Congress other than somebody who's concerned only with health and education.
Oh, that's wonderful. Oh, that's beautiful. Jeez, I wonder what they wanted him to do. Military affairs or?
Well, he was chairman of
Tax cuts.
the House Health and Education.
You know, I was just a young, I wasn't a young man, but I guess I was a young man. Just out of high school a couple of years when he died. I think it was 1967. And they had a cortege go from the State House down through Cranston Street to St. Anne's Cemetery. And I can remember, I mean, I didn't really have much Irish knowledge at that time. And I remember just going, because I knew who the congressman was, and that he was a big Irish individual, but I didn't know much else. I was amazed at the people on the side of the street, because there were hard hats there who took their hat off and put it over their heart. So I saw business people in suits and dresses standing there watching, crying. I mean, this guy was a legend. And we look at people like Potter and Williams and Fogarty and say, what the hell is going on? Why did the whole state know about it today? I mean, these are our heroes and our heroines as well as people who made things happen. And so we've got to find a way to do it. But I don't mean to be pessimistic, because on the other hand, we're living through our own revival right now. I think with the establishment and construction a number of years ago, many people here participated, of the Irish Famine Memorial. I think the emergence of the 1916 committee. I think the masses that were held in commemoration of the 150th anniversary of the Great Famine. Continued things like this. There are still 12 or 15 active Irish American groups around the state, even though they don't get together very often. Some of them only meet themselves twice a year. So we got to find a way to do that and to get more people, especially younger, to get involved. I may have a wonderful, I sound like Donald Trump here, and I have a wonderful announcement to make sometime in the near future. Right after the election. Right after the election. But vote for me, because I got a great idea. So we'll see what happens with that, but I hope that this will assist us in our quest. Anything else before you get your free books? Thank you very much. It's wonderful to hear you.
Hey, if you could just indulge me for a couple of minutes. I have some announcements that I think are important. I'd just also like to comment on something. Scott touched on this, I don't know if you call it discrimination or this propaganda that the Irish have had to deal with. And I think everyone here is probably familiar with the tragedy that happened in England 2 or 3 weeks ago when 39 Vietnamese migrants were found dead in a refrigerated truck. I make a point out of reading the news from Northern Ireland. And it turns out the guy that drove the truck was from Northern Ireland. Not only was he from Northern Ireland, he was part of a loyalist paramilitary organization that never recognized the Good Friday Agreement, and they are smuggling and drug dealers and things like that. This was just another job for this kid. However, as the news comes out, it comes out of the British government's press office. Every time he has been in court, he's been called Irish. And I'm sure he'd never called himself Irish in his life, you know, but that goes on and whatever. So again, this is the 1916 committee here sponsoring this. Next Tuesday night, Patrick's Pub in Smith Hill, 7 o'clock, we have a regular meeting. At the meeting, we discuss a number of things, including future lectures. If anyone has an idea, if anyone wants to volunteer, we are always willing to listen and, you know, support anybody who wants to step up here, because it's not easy. The Cayley Club here is a valuable resource to Rhode Island, Irish America. It's, I don't know where the hell we'd be without this. I mean, we'd be in pubs, and it's just not right for a lecture like this to be competing with a basketball game on television. But the Cayley Club is sponsoring music downstairs that you can hear. In the back, we have a raffle. Please support the raffle, even if you don't like the prizes. This is how we pay the musician. This is how we extend the nights after the lecture, so that there's a social, cultural component to this event. Also, the Cayley Club is an organization in its own right. February 15th is the Thanksgiving night turkey raffle type thing. But before that, it's November. How do I keep doing that? Oh, this is a sharp problem. Scott, I told you, I'm making a mistake. Hey, but anyway, so November 15th is a special election here at the Cayley Club. The vice president's position is open, and it's a special election that night. A lot of people here are members. Please try to come. Peggy, Flynn, and Sorrel Devine are the candidates. It won't be a big thing. I don't think there's speeches or anything like that. But it's important that we get together and support this kind of thing. After that, there's a turkey raffle and activity down in the pub. The next night, November 16th, there's a concert up here with,
Downstairs.
Hanzaraki and Dan Fayella. Dan Fayella's a school teacher out in East Providence, a great, hell of a guitar player too. And Tuesday night, we always discuss Brexit, because what Fogarty said about ending the partition before the trouble comes back is just as true today. And the last deal that was done with Johnson put the border in the Irish Sea, which is where it should have been in 1920. And it is our hope that working with the politicians here, we can convince the United States government to stand by the Good Friday Agreement and not have a border reestablished in Ireland. If that were to happen, it would be a further disaster. There's no question about that. Anybody who wants to get involved with us, some of us are going to meet Senator Reid's office, his chief of staff this week, and we're trying to get the whole delegation behind the concept that there should not be a border in Ireland, regardless of what the UK wants to do in leaving the European Union. Okay, end of speech, but that, it is important. This is very important, what is going on with Brexit and the UK leaving, because the British will throw away the Good Friday Agreement the first chance they have. America is a co-sponsor it, and we have to keep that pressure going, okay? So that's that. The next time we're gonna be here, 1916 committee, it's not gonna be a lecture, it's gonna be December 6th, a Friday night, and we're gonna have a concert. Colm O'Brien, some of you have heard him downstairs, is gonna be on the stage, a solo performance, no TVs, nobody talking back and forth, but Colm is a great singer, he's from Dublin, he's got a repertoire that you can't match, he tells stories about the songs. I highly recommend it, because it's free, all you gotta do is buy a raffle ticket, and, you know, and it's gonna be it's gonna be a real good night, so if you can mark that down, Friday night, December 6th, it's a different thing, but you'll get politically educated with Colm, just the way you did with Scott, only it would be through words and music, okay? And we're glad Scott didn't sing tonight. All right, thank you very much for coming, and I hope